I don't know what to exactly tell you. I mean, you're just going to expect every video to be starting like this. Hello. All right, this is Dustin Husky, and let's talk about being poor. So, going to probably get into exactly what this video is going to be about because I was at Pick and Save. Brian, buying as many frozen wings in a bag as I can. Then there was a little girl. I think it was a little girl. Yeah, it must have been a little girl. Was asking her mom if she could buy uh, Tostino's pizza rolls or whatever. Some kind of fun stuff that I remember as a kid having a few times, and also my folks telling me, "Oh no, sorry son, we can't do that. It's not part of the budget." So I can relate. And she asked her mom, asking if she can buy a box or two, and she just simply says, "I'm sorry, hon, we just can't afford that." And I remember her kind of looking around. She looked at me, then she looked at another person who just kind of wasn't paying attention to any of that at all. And I wonder if she felt, because that she can't afford the things that she'd want to buy, that maybe perhaps she thought I'd think differently of her, which, who am I to judge? I grew up in that same similar situation with my folks, come from a working class background. I can't judge. It's just something that I grew up and very familiar with. Tightening your belt and eating everything around the bone. And then finally you throw the bone out. Poor is a very dirty word in this country because throughout time, or let's say in the last 100 years, the let's go through a few decades in this past century. So 2020, so let's go back to 1920 and then after that. What does it mean to be poor? Well, you're literally making ends meet. And boy, is that going to not change for the next century to this day. So really, we're off to a good start, or a bad start, or an inspirational video of how people should get paid more, or get paid more, or you lower the cost of goods and services, which that won't happen. But also, too, companies won't give people more raises because that gives them less money. It's a vicious cycle. So in the 1920s and 30s, well, up to 29, of course, there were those that worked hard to get where they were, even if it meant renting a single room in an apartment with other people, with other families. So pretty much all the boys stopped going to school after 6th grade, if any of them got past 6th grade. So they had a grade school education, and they, of course, went to work at a very young age. So growing up poor, in that sense, is that life was going to be a bit tough. You're going to have to work hard for it. And even if you do make it through and see light at the end of the tunnel, the days and the nights are going to be incredibly long. The days being you work 12 hours a day, and often enough you ate a good meal only once a day. Sometimes nights were long when you didn't have enough to eat, and maybe hard to sleep. I could sort of relate. Then the Great Depression then all this imaginary money of stocks going up and up and up and up and up, and then there was a ceiling, and then boom, it went. Or in stock market terms, that wouldn't be a boom, it would be a bust. Oh, a total bust. Then what it means to be poor is everyone lost something after 1929, after Black Thursday. Everyone lost something. And, you know, people started to actually, as in they were, it's not to say that if you were poor you were in hiding. It was being visible. It was out there. People didn't think maybe too much about it back then, especially during Great Depression, where everyone was taking hard hits, especially the poor, because only they can't go any further than they are then at that very moment. The only ones that really got hit the worst were, of course, the rich that may have lost everything. And the middle class, I mean, there were some people that were insulated from the Great Depression, and they didn't see much difference in their standard of living, so, that didn't change. But as far as work, companies folded, and the very thing that, working class families had was just simply $1 a day. Enough just to keep them alive. And people of all creeds felt the stress and the strain. That was the Great Depression economy that would follow until, Pearl Harbor. And World War II would fully get us out of that decline. Until 1941, things were slightly getting better in the 30s, but not to an extent that people wanted it to be. Eventually, factories came back online, although, of course, of the 50 American motor manufacturing companies in the 1920s, maybe less than 16 were available at the end of the 1930s. Just, cutthroat tactics, where you see big competition, like in the likes of Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler. So during then, everyone was in the same spot. So everyone understood. Everyone knew what it feels like to be down on your luck, living $1 a day, and just scraping by to get by. Everyone understood. It was a universal feeling by many. So in this case, everyone felt what it felt like to be poor. World War II happens, 1945, and then now, not only is the Great Depression officially over, I mean, it got better once war were declared. That's a reference to another YouTube channel, which, if you know it, nice. So, by 1945, where you couldn't buy anything due to war rationing, people's pockets were finally flush with cash that they couldn't spend it on anything. They had ration booklets, so they only spent what was only needed. So they saved boatloads of money. It was certainly a buyer's market. New homes being built after the war by either returning GIs or people looking for work in this post-war economy. Things were still booming. Things were on the upswing. Things were great for a while. And then, during this time of prosperity, yeah, the poor was still existing, but perhaps I need to maybe look more into this time period of the working American, but I think at this time, the middle class was certainly big. I think a lot of the working class of the 1920s and 30s eventually became the lower ends of the middle class. And the middle class of the 1920s and 30s became the upper middle class. So, once again, not only did the middle class of yesteryear got a higher standing of living, so did the working class. They were able to finally move up in the world a bit. Yeah, they were still at the bottom, but on on a hierarchy level maybe, but they were still doing better than what they were in the 1930s. And they were certainly grateful for it too, that things got better. But then there's still that small, or big, I'm not sure what the percentage is, that working class people in America during this time, because it's hard enough to believe that during this huge boom expansionist economy that the United States was genuinely enjoying post World War II. I don't know, it almost seemed like you almost had to try to act to be poor. Yeah, there was still communities that were, that may not have changed much, even from the Great Depression, although it's like in the state of Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin has still been in a jobs depression since the 1880s. More and more people from the north are moving down south of the state, because there's more work to be done here. So even today, that's still true. Maybe more now than it was in the past, but back then, people were slowly finding their way down south to Milwaukee, Madison, Kenosha, Racine, Janesville, whatever, where have you. So it almost seemed like it was at a time when, yeah, you could be working class, but you were still working your butt off, but you made sure that you looked the part. Not working class, but ideally they wanted to become more middle class, but doing it within their budget. And they did so with pride, because they felt if they worked hard enough, they can still climb up the social ladder, and still, many of them still did. Until I'm sure there was probably another economic bust in the 1950s. I'm just not sure, but the one I'm thinking of is like the 1957 or 58. Not crash, but it was a recession. Actually, it was a recession, which saw the introduction of a new class of car, the compact and economy car. Actually, it was the economy compact car of the 1960s. Actually begun with Studebaker, although they needed more sales and they got more sales, which probably saved the company a few more years before it did finally collapse in 1966. But anyway, yeah, there was a recession, but it didn't last too long, and then the 60s was quite prosperous. And so was the 70s. There were, sad to say, like this country has a economic system of boom and bust. It has to. That's a capitalist economy. Capitalism cannot be constantly rising. It must drop in order to reset itself. Again, that's what capitalism is. It's destructive. Planned economies don't have busts or rises. It's a plateau. While you don't go anywhere fast, it's fully stable. Although inflation still exists, that's with any kind of economy. So during this time, in the 1960s, you were almost kind of looked down upon, 60s, 70s, for being poor. Because it almost seemed like even in this prosperous time, you could do better. And those that didn't were often looked down upon in this country. So that's why people were ashamed to buy the cheapest economy car. They still knew they needed a economy car, but they'd buy the most well-equipped version of a car. And in fact, most economy cars that America would introduce during this time, the first few years were mostly stripped down economy models, but by 1962, a lot of them were starting to become more upmarket, like their a full-size counterpart, and then intermediate or mid-size offerings for cars. So even for cars, people were wanting to express themselves by showing they're doing good in the world by, no, 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 we don't need the stripped down version. We're doing okay. We can afford a few $100 more to buy the special deluxe sort of thing. So there's still there's the illusion of doing good. Well, you're doing adequate. You could do better, but you still want to show the rest of the world that you're doing okay with everyone else. So there's this illusion that you're doing fantastic like everyone else. I mean, poor people still existed throughout time anyway. But I think during this period, things were still okay. 70s, same thing. But 70s was the last great decade in which Americans bought things out of pocket. They saved up for what they wanted. When they were willing to make a purchase, they took their savings and they bought what they wanted. They saved what they wanted to buy. Then Reagan came around, and then Reaganomics and that sort, where it was one easy way to stimulate the economy during the 1980 recession, which continued until 1983. Although, really, when they say that, well, big cars still sold anyway, and anyone who could scrap together pennies for a car could still get one. But now, there was a shift in terms of debt. For the first time ever, more and more people in the early 1980s, instead of buying their cars outright or any type of appliance, they were taking out loans or doing it through payment programs. For the first time ever, the average American has never done this before. In fact, in the 1960s, people outright bought their cars and often enough traded them in with whatever was the resale value. And manufacturers on purpose made the resale values as high as they could so that they can keep doing this. Nowadays, there's no such thing as a resale value. It's whatever people are willing to give for it, and it's not much money. Back then, anything could be resold with high resale value, and for your next replacement, you only had to pay a little bit more on top of that. The 1980s, that was starting to change. 1983 was a big year where more and more people bought cars on loans than they did buying it outright. Oh. The biggest form of debt to any American right now is the automobile loan. The most common form of debt, not student loans. Student loans comes at I think a distant 3. Next is, I believe, mortgage debt. But buying a house, you can't obviously afford to pay for it in full, so that's normal. I'm not too surprised by that. But to think that a car costs less than a home, and yet is the number one single form of major debt to any American, and the biggest number of debt piling up, by subject or by type. It is the most, as far as overall cost right now, it's several $billion, something to that degree. So people were getting more and more into debt. Reagan encouraged Americans to, spend your money freely, stimulate the economy, buy stuff, and people did. So instead of saving money, the middle class is starting to inch down to lower middle class to upper working class levels of living, or standards of living. But people still bought to maintain their lifestyle. So there's still that illusion that still exists, but now the game is rigged against them. Not only is inflation creeping up on them, inflation is certainly outstripping increased cost of, or not increased cost of living, but, well, inflation is increased cost of living, but wages were starting to really, really slow down in the 1980s. They've been slowing down since 1968, hands down. 1968 was the last great year where the American buying power was at its strongest. Never since then have we had stronger buying power. Never again. And the distance between inflation and buying power with your money is so great, it's perfectly worthless. Like, you're better off just sitting on your money and you not get too much from it. You're better off buying art or buying a fursuit. At least that is a better deal. So, Americans are starting to rack up debt. It's not debt that, oh yeah, we can't afford certain stuff, so we can't afford to buy it. It's more of, I'm going to buy it anyway, and then acquire debt in the process. But hey, you know what? That's fine. In time, I can pay it off any time I want to. Some Americans do, and most Americans don't. A lot of Americans, especially older people, mostly my folks' age, and mainly my age, we have a pretty bad bout of debt. As far as my age bracket is concerned, we still rack up the most debt as far as, medical bills, student loans, car loan. Oddly enough, not much mortgage debt because many millennials my age can't afford a house. You can get a house loan, but not many millennials do because they already are racked up with so much debt anyway. It's like putting a thumb in the eye. You're just, again, more salt to that wound. So now, the idea of looking at the poor, and I'm not talking homeless, I'm just talking about poor. At some point, Americans, especially during the 2008 recession, that's when people started looking at each other like the Great Depression. People of all creeds were realizing we all thought we were made from a different cloth, but in the end, we were still cut from that same cloth. Only very few people insulated from financial disasters could be insulated from such events and don't feel it. If you lost something during 2008 or felt a crunch, you're not as high and lofty as you thought you were. And that's 80% of all Americans in this country, which is a lot of us. Then we're back in the 1930s in mentality where we're all in this together. We're all suffering in some way, shape, and form. And the idea of visually being poor, where in the 1960s you had to try hard to be poor. Where back then your buying power was incredible. There's no excuse. And in the 1930s, you found what you could. 1950s, 70s, 80s, well, 50s and 60s for the most part, you had to try hard. You had to be lazy to be poor. There were jobs at every corner. The idea that a house could cost you $12 and a job fairy would hand you a lifelong career with great benefits, retirement package, and a good meaning of existence by doing work that you can be proud of for many, many, many years after. Those days are gone. So in the 60s, you were seen as a lazy bum. 1980s, we all have debt, but so what? In the 1990s, we had Surge and Pogs and Green Day. But again, back to the Great Recession of 2007, or is it 2008? Everyone realized, like in the 1930s, we're all cut from the same cloth. And people lost a lot, especially on their houses. Suddenly their $300,000, $400,000 home is not anywhere worth what they paid for it now. And that debt follows them forever. Oh yeah. Your McMansion that you paid $500,000 for is not worth $500,000 anymore. You're lucky to get $150,000. Housing bubble is a bitch, because you know what? Americans were touting inflated prices for all things. Right now, we're currently in a vehicle pricing bubble, where car prices are going up and up and up and up, and people are going to still buy a car, but they're really now begrudgingly tolerating it right now. It won't be very long until that bubble pops, and then they realize your $100,000 Nissan Titan X-Trail truck, or pickup truck that you just bought, which I think those do exist. I meant the cost. They're going to realize that, oh, this truck should ideally be no more than $60,000. But people will pay what they want to pay, and manufacturers, they're going to oblige. They're going to say, hey, if I can get some idiot to buy an $80,000 Ford pickup truck, oh shit, I'm going to do it anyway. Because the idiot's going to buy it without ever thinking about it. And even if we say we're going to give them $8,000 off sticker price, they're still making money hand over fist. They don't care. They're still ripping you off anyway. The best deal you can find is a car. If it's an SUV or a truck, you're so fucked. Because the deal you made is not really a deal at all. So now, being poor. Now they've politicalized being poor to being a millennial, which really it happens to anyone of any age. Again, as I mentioned, of all creeds. But now they've associated being poor as now you're a millennial. I mean, they're not off. A lot of millennials have college debt. Those that had medical issues go to a hospital. You know, health insurance in this country is not that great. So, of course, you're going to be paying for a lot of it. Especially with COVID, hospital bills, $250,000, and these are working class families that could never ever pay that off. Many people my age don't tend to buy new cars. And when they do, it's because they got themselves into a good career, but careers are fleeting. They're not forever, at least not in the sense that you think it is. Forever for you is 5 years. Forever for someone, our parents and our grandparents, was a lifetime. We're just making by. And many people still think that being poor is negative, which, honestly, I still think 80% of all Americans are in the same boat. It's just, it depends on how much they're getting paid, and they're still buckets of debt. Doesn't matter how much you're getting paid. We're all kind of in the same similar boat. And I think really the least amount of debt you are, even if you're being paid $18,000 a year, you're doing pretty good, at least as far as debt. But now you're debt free, you still ain't going anywhere fast. You know, $18,000 is high school kid wage shit. And you're in your late 20s and you're getting paid that much. You really have to actually wonder, am I actually poor? Or is society and corporations forcing this upon me? Go think about that. Because back 100 years ago, you were poor because of your family. Social status was a huge thing back then. First, second, third class. Whatever class you were born into, you were going to die into. Nowadays, we don't care what family history you've had. We really don't care. We don't think that should be a part of how we think of you. That's great. Cool. We've advanced as a society as far as that. Except for old money. Old money will still think that. But as far as we all know, new money and ordinary Americans don't think that. But the system is totally working against us. I don't want to think I'm poor. I frankly don't care what you think about me anyway, but yeah, I could say I'm poor. Although, poor in the sense of wages. I like to think I'm rich in experience, rich in talents. I think more of that, more than what I'm getting paid. I see more of myself as someone who's got lots of talents, lots of experiences that weighs more of itself in gold than I do get paid in cash a year. I don't mind that. I don't see myself as poor. It's just we're living in a moment where everything is kind of pushed against us. And there's not much we can do about it. Not unless we become cocaine dealers or we start brown-nosing millionaires. We're all in a similar boat, whether if you're making $50,000 or $20,000 or $80,000. We're all chasing to pay off that debt. We're all made from the same cloth in the end. I think people shouldn't be worried to be seen if they are really poor. I don't like to think so. I just think it's not the hand that you're dealt. I think it's literally not the stack of cards being shuffled. I literally think the big giant box that all these cards came from is really to blame. Because really anyone, anything can be what they want in life. I'm just rambling. The point made is back in the day, the system was not well thought out to be against the workers because they obviously needed workers to make their system work. So it actually kind of worked for the worker. Nowadays, we're all cogs in the system. The system knows that. We know that, but we have no choice because without them, we can't survive. Back in the day, without workers, the system could not survive. The system could certainly live without us, but they still need corporate slaves to do their bidding. So, I really don't think there's any weight in the word poor anymore. At least not in the sense that we're all heading that direction. It's just we call it middle class. To be honest, that's just a label. Whether if you're bi, gay, straight, it's just a label. You have your talents, you have your gifts. That's what's weight in gold. How much you make. One can say they're poor. They're not doing so well. It's just another label. I could certainly do a lot better than I am right now. Although I don't think I'm that poor. In fact, I think even despite the shit that I have to go through, it could be a lot worse. I don't know how. It could be certainly a lot worse. So, Sometimes someone someday is going to look at the word poor, and that definition is going to be a crowd of people. And it's not what they are, it's just what they think. But are they really? Frankly, even my shit idiot boss, he has a talent making beer. That's still a quality, even though he makes more than double than what I make, and seems to spend it all on frivolous shit and on projects that he never finishes. So in a sense, even if he is paying more than double than I'm being paid, he acts like he's poor. But it's the qualities of a person that you are is what you should probably focus on the most. And if you have a good attitude in life, and definitely be stubborn to make your life better and easier, that's a better path. So the transformation of the idea of poor over the last 100 years is almost kind of come full circle with the Great Depression and what we're living through today, under different reasons, under different circumstances. It's one thing I would say to that woman. Don't worry. Be happy. This has been a half-assed episode or video. Not really an episode of any series of videos. I could go a lot more deeper. He put the hat in deeper! If it's one thing Kurt Ann told me a long time ago, is that labels are stupid. Labels can define us, but it shouldn't. Yeah, you can label yourself as whatever you want. Sometimes those labels don't make you happy. And some labels do make you happy, but just be you. Do the best you can. And if me working at a shit job is the only thing I can find at this moment until I find something else, you know what? So be it. I would hate to, oh my God, hate to work another year here, which I won't last, but hey, if I find something else, it pays less. Really hope not, because to be honest, like any average American, a little bit more money helps. Oh, I see money as a necessary evil. It's evil. More money, more problems. Yeah, you get paid more, but all of a sudden it will bite you back in the ass eventually. But more money does help. But the whole point of the video of being poor mostly stems from money. It's a self-value thing. I think that's something like a label we should cut from our lives. Not be totally complacent to where you are. Have room for improvement. But don't make money a value of what you're worth. Because in the end, it's going to be the most toxic thing you'll ever do to yourself. So, when you look at that box of Tostino pizza rolls, you may not be able to afford it now. Maybe next week you'll have a better week. and you'll be able to buy a box or two. Enjoy life. And enjoy pizza rolls. Gotta live at times. Thanks, guys, for listening to my awful rambling about the idea of poor and this evolution of this country's version of perceived poor. It's an idea I've thought for a while. It's just a word. And most words, you're better off not putting any stock into. Because I certainly don't want to be fully rich. I mean, yeah, it would be nice to be rich, but that has its own problems too. So is poor. Middle ground would be nice. The middle ground that has no word to describe that. It's a good goal to work to. But chase your own dream. Don't chase money. Don't chase labels. It might disappoint you in the end.